Here are 3 mistakes people make when they pray that they don't even realize they're doing, which can block their prayers and make them feel that their prayers aren't heard no matter how much they pray. Not only will we identify these mistakes, but I'll also reveal how you can overcome them so you can start experiencing the fullness of God's blessings. You need to follow each step of this video because the first mistake creates the basis for understanding the third mistake. And by the end of this video, you will have total clarity on how to correct your prayers and experience a deeper connection with God. Now imagine the transformation a powerful prayer can bring to your life. I'm talking about inner peace, confidence in difficult times, divine answers, and directions from God. If you're ready to experience the presence of God like never before, let's dive into mistake number 1. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 through 46, we have Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. This was the night before his crucifixion, but he is experiencing sorrow as he anticipates and visions the physical suffering of the crucifixion, the emotional pain of being abandoned, and the spiritual weight of bearing the sins of the world. Jesus was facing so much immense mental and emotional agony, his body started to sweat blood. This reveals the extreme weight of what laid ahead. He goes to God in prayer. Expressing his request to God in Mark chapter 14, verse 36, Jesus says, "Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And so this brings us to our first mistake, which is prioritizing your will over God's will. Now, Jesus, despite being the Son of God, didn't pray solely for his desire, which was to avoid suffering, but submitted fully to God's greater plan. This is totally different from the "if you pray for it, it will happen" mindset, because he prayed for this misfortune to be taken away from him, but he ended the prayer with saying, "Not my will be done, but may your will be done." Imagine someone, we'll call him John. John has his relationship with his girlfriend. We'll call her Emily. And so he deeply loves her and hopes to marry her. However, John is noticing signs that their relationship isn't as healthy as he believed. They have constant conflicts about faith and life values. Emily seems uninterested in growing spiritually or supporting John's walk with God. And John feels unrest in his spirit about their future together. So he goes to prayer. And while it's difficult, John finally surrenders his desire, praying, "God, not my will, but yours. If this relationship isn't part of your plan for my life, help me to let it go and trust you for something better." And so, of course, shortly after, John and Emily part ways. Even though he's heartbroken, John soon sees how God uses this to guide him toward a deeper relationship with Christ. And over time, he meets someone new, and someone who shares his faith and his values, which helps him build a relationship rooted in God's word. It's okay to pray for big things, but make sure your mindset is for God's will to be done and not yours. Because if God gives you what you asked for and you didn't consider if it was his will first, it could lead to a terrible tragedy in your life, which leads us into mistake number 2. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 through 34, we have the Israelites journeying into the promised land. And so this is after the deliverance from slavery in Egypt. And at this point in the journey, the Israelites are in the desert and they've been receiving manna, which was like a miraculous blessing from God to sustain them. However, the Israelites grew tired of this manna. They started to crave other food, they started to crave meat, and they even started romanticizing about their times as slaves in Egypt, forgetting their suffering as slaves, but rather focusing on the food they once enjoyed. Talking with each other about the fish, cucumbers, and melons they used to eat at no expense. So they go to Moses and express their feelings and their thoughts, and they ask for him to go to God on their behalf, and they ask for something else to eat. And so when Moses brought this request to God, God was angry because of their ungratefulness for what he was providing for them. So God gave them exactly what they wanted. He said, "You will eat it for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and you are disgusted with it because you have rejected the Lord." This brings us to mistake number 2, which is that prayers driven by wrong motives can lead to outcomes that are not in our best interest. Their motives were focused on satisfying their cravings rather than seeking God's will or glorifying him. Though God grants their requests, it ultimately leads to judgment rather than blessing because their hearts were not aligned with God's. Imagine someone, and for the sake of time, we'll stay with John as the name. John has a good job, stable income, decent benefits, and good working hours. However, he begins to focus on what he doesn't have, and he complains about the lack of career growth in the company. He fixates on small annoyances like routine tasks, and he's forgetting about the stability and provision he has. So he goes to God praying for a better job, coming from a place of complaining. And so over time, he finally lands a new job, which pays more than the job he had before. But little did he know that this would lead to something much more worse than he could ever imagine. He quickly starts to hate the job more than his old job because of the toxic environment of difficult co-workers, micromanaging managers, the long hours with no overtime pay, and lastly, the job responsibilities he's asked to do that was not in the job description. This illustrates the danger of self-centered prayers. Focus on how you can bless others and push God's kingdom further through the current blessing he has you in right now or that you're praying for. Which leads us to our last mistake. Now, by the way, if you found value so far in this video, please do me the honor and like and subscribe to the channel. Anyway, back to the last mistake. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5 through 14, we have the wisest man who ever lived, King Solomon. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings to the Lord. This extravagant act of worship displayed Solomon's devotion and reverence for God. So after Solomon's offering, God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give to you." This moment right here was a profound act of divine generosity, giving Solomon the opportunity to ask for anything. Instead of requesting wealth or power, Solomon asked for wisdom, which you probably already knew, but do you know why he asked for it instead of riches and power? The answer will shock you. He asked for the wisdom so that he can govern God's people in the best way possible, because he prioritized others before himself when talking to God. This made God so happy. He was so pleased with Solomon because of his selfless decision, so much that when he granted him wisdom, he also brought along riches and honor, which brings us to mistake number 3, which is not prioritizing the well-being of others over selfish desires. When you pray for these big blessings, make sure to also say, "Lord, if you grant me this big blessing, guide me on how I can use it to serve others in your kingdom." Let's sum this up in another story. David is a young entrepreneur who recently started his own tech company. It's a tough industry to break into, and every day feels like a new challenge. As his company starts to grow, David faces the weight of decisions that could either make or break his business, like who to hire, who to manage his resources, or how to balance his faith with the pressures of competition. David feels overwhelmed, unsure of which direction to take. He knows that many successful people often pray for success, wealth, and an influence, but David doesn't feel at peace with just asking for those things. He wants something deeper, something that aligns with his faith, his love for those around him, and the impact he wants to make in this world. One night as he sits in his quiet office, David starts to imagine the business failing and him having to let people know that they are no longer going to have a job. Feeling this humility and uncertainty, he asks God, "Lord, I don't know how to navigate all these decisions. I don't want to do this on my own. Please give me wisdom to make the right choices for my business, for my employees, in my community. Help me to lead with integrity and to honor you through this company no matter the outcome." As David continues to seek God's wisdom, he begins to notice subtle shifts in his decision making. He starts to focus more on the well-being of his employees rather than just profits. He finds creative ways to use his resources to support charitable causes. And over time, the company flourishes, not just financially, but in the trust and respect of those who work with him. David realizes that the wisdom he prayed for wasn't just about the business strategy, but about having a heart that seeks God's will in everything. His success comes not from his own intelligence, but from following the guidance he received in prayer. Same for Solomon. Solomon's prayer reflects a heart focused on serving others rather than personal gain. God rewards prayers that prioritize his kingdom and the well-being of others over selfish desires.